So I made a detailed packing checklist and another prep checklist for my home and vehicle maintenance, and I updated emergency documentation. I freshly paid my bills and so on, and I worked really hard for those 2 weeks prior so my coworkers wouldn't be left with a bevy of unhappy colleagues wanting stuff that I normally do for them. Thankfully, my managers and coworkers were very understanding and supportive of getting my neck worked out, and I brought my laptop and the ability to connect in remotely if needed. So with as light a suitcase and backpack as I could pack, but still kind of heavy for those 2.5 weeks, my kiddo and her boyfriend dropped me off at Columbus Airport on 11/7, and I made my way through into Newark, New Jersey. Now we had to deplane as soon as we were settled for the transatlantic flight due to a maintenance issue, but we got moving again and finally got into London, England, and then into Munich's airport with another connecting flight. By the way, I had chosen to fly business class, which unfortunately costs 3 to 4 times more, but it took the edge off my nerves by being able to lie down and sleep during that transatlantic flight. And it also let me into premier lounges for some delicious and free food and quiet time. I knew that I was going to especially like that coming back, and once you fly business class that many hours, it's hard to imagine flying that long any other way. You just try not to think about the price. Speaking of premier lounges, I met three ladies who were returning from a girls' trip to New York City from Los Angeles. They were returning back to LA. And in our conversation, it turns out that one lady knew exactly why I was going to Germany because she had accompanied a close friend 5 years ago to Stenham for a multiple disc replacement. And it was a crazy coincidence because, not a whole lot of people know a lot about this. Her friend was about to give up his small business, apparently back then, due to progressively worsening cervical pain. But now, 5 years post-op, he's doing great and has expanded his business several times over. She and I exchanged cards and promised to keep in touch. And in fact, she even offered to meet me in Germany at one point if it turned out I needed a traveling companion since she's not working right now. I knew she didn't mean it the other way, so I thought it was a really pretty cool and very human offer from her. I very much appreciate that. Once I got to London and then into Munich, I found customs and immigration really super easy to get through after picking up my bag, thankfully, which followed me plane to plane. And the driver that ProSpine had arranged, Peter, had met me with a sign right outside of the airport's exit. Speaking of Peter, by the way, he's really awesome. I enjoyed his demeanor and conversation, and I was delighted when he missed a turnoff somewhere near Straubing, which caused us to have to drive through some of the Bavarian countryside and through a couple small picturesque German towns. I found it comforting to see that the landscape is a lot like Ohio and Pennsylvania, and even the farms look a lot like our Pennsylvania Dutch and Amish parcels. I wanted so badly to jump out of the car onto a few motorcycles that I saw and take off across the countryside and down the farm roads and trails, but I'm here for another reason, and it'll give me something to reflect upon when I'm able to ride in the spring. By the way, traveling 125 miles an hour legally on the Autobahn is pretty damn cool. We arrived in Bogen, and Peter got me checked into the Pension Schreiber Hotel. I went into room 20, which is near the upper end, the end of the upstairs hall. The desk assistant didn't speak a whole lot of English, so I appreciated Peter's help. I paid him that well-deserved fee and unpacked a few essentials since I'd only be there for one day, and decided to walk around Bogen a bit. I didn't venture more than about a mile or two, but I walked the main strip in a loop and took some pictures and a short video. Nearly every shop was closed, unfortunately, because I had arrived on Sunday, and he explained that it's considered a family day of rest there. So I wished I had eaten something at the airport or brought a sandwich, but since I didn't, I was pretty darn hungry. The town was picturesque, and most of the buildings are made from local brick and then plastered or painted white. So that bit is different than Columbus or Ohio and Pennsylvania in general. And it reminded me a little bit more of New Hope, which is a town in Pennsylvania, and it also reminded me of many of the European villages that have rivers running through like one corner of the town. Anyway, the hotel itself is pretty quaint. There's not a lot to it, but it's very affordable. It's clean. I didn't see an iron in the room like American hotels usually have, and they didn't really have the heat turned up yet, so I just added a layer and took it kind of like a mini camping or glamping adventure. They could upgrade their internet service, but it was all good. I was still able to email and to message my family and friends to let them know how I was doing. By the way, I did see a few homes and beer gardens behind the arches of beyond the main strip of that square. about as regularly as you expect pubs in London. And there were a couple cafes or bakeries open, but I wasn't really in the mood for pastries. And so, since I was getting self-conscious about my terrible understanding of the German language, I walked back to the hotel, bought an Aldersbacher Ural beer, and enjoyed it in my room before catching up on email and then getting to sleep. Now, the next day, which is the day before surgery, I got up at 7 a.m. and had breakfast at the hotel. Got to meet the owners, who made me a hard-boiled egg and coffee and motioned me to a table of cured meats and breads and cheeses and vegetables and cereals and milk and juices and way more than I could possibly eat. Um, it was very good, and I actually met a couple Americans who came with their family members who had a lumbar fusion done in May. They had some issues with it, having to do with a sacrum angle and the pressure that it was applying to the plates. So it was interesting to hear the story, and I felt really sympathetic to them. But fortunately, with me having cervical surgery, that wasn't going to be applicable to me. After breakfast, Peter picked me up and took me to the hospital, where I checked into my room. I answered a whole bunch of health questions with Dr. Nichols and completed blood work I couldn't get done in Ohio, shared my image discs, which they determined to be good and recent enough not to require additional images. Also did an EKG test to make sure my heart was ready for surgery, and I got an injection to prevent thrombosis. By the way, that last bit is in the stomach, but it's not like what you think. In fact, when the nurse approached me and told me that I needed to take an injection in the tummy, I was thinking tetanus shot, and I was like, oh, really? But it was no big deal. It's a little pinprick right underneath your skin, so it's nothing. And I felt kind of embarrassed afterwards, but oh well. Um, in the United States, or in the first floor of the Bogan Hospital, there's actually a map of the United States, and that shows where their American patients have come from. And I found a pin that was even from Lancaster, Ohio, which is near Columbus. Struck up a conversation with another fella who was there, and it turns out he's from Turkey. And we didn't have really much in common, but we did get to be friendly and talk with each other, and pointed out a couple things on the map. And it turns out that the Bogan Clinic itself is actually a county hospital that takes all kinds of cases. You know, it's not just these surgical cases from Americans that are looking for ADRs, but it's, sick kids and broken arms and pneumonia and ER cases and everything else that you would expect from a community hospital. Bertolli uses it as his primary surgical site, mainly because they have an ER and a really highly equipped ICU. His own office, in fact, is just a short walk. I mean, like not even 100 feet from the hospital. And I believe that most of his staff are Straubing area residents. I then, in the afternoon of the day before surgery, met with Dr. Bertolli, and I was really impressed. He's got this incredibly calm, confident, capable, and kind manner. What's neat is that I was video chatting with my daughter at the time when he came in. I was using FaceTime. And by the way, FaceTime and Skype are free when you're on Wi-Fi, so it's a great way to stay in touch. So I got to introduce my daughter to Bertolli and vice versa, and she appreciated being called lovely. And Dr. Bertolli explained the procedure then to me in detail, his rationale, what the devices look like, precautions and safety measures we'll use beforehand, during and after the operation. And we even talked a little bit about being able to ride motorcycles next year. And it turns out that he's a BMW R1200 GS rider, which is an adventure-style motorcycle. So it made me feel a lot better about doing 4 levels, even if it's a big surgery, knowing that somebody who's familiar with riding and gets the same level of enjoyment out of the same kind of riding is telling me, yeah, there shouldn't be any issues. Just don't motocross. So I was good with that.